All right, they'll wander in, I'm sure. Okay, so, words of the day. These may not be so exciting, but they're good. Let's write it. Let's write it like this: C-U-R-I-O-S first, and then let's write it like this: C-U-R-I-O-S. But it isn't. It's not curios. It's not curios. It's not curios. Kurios. This is a word that's translated as Lord. In the modern world, we might say Mr. or Sir. But this,
Lord is a capital or Lord is a...
There's no caps and there's no smalls.
As far as what we would consider.
Well, it's applied. Okay, this is why I gave you this word. This word is universally applied to Christ in the New Testament. However, as a title, all right? But this word is specific in Greek. Kurios is the title that is usually applied to Mithras. Mithras. Right? I won't go into the god Mithras. The god Mithras is a Mysterion god. He is a weird Mysterion god that came out of a mix between the Osirian Mysterion and the Greeks and Romans. But Mithras was the guy that most of the legions were big time into Mithran worship, which is very interesting because Mithras is, all right, I guess I got to say it. It's going to be on the tape. All right, Mithras is a god who intentionally emasculated himself. Okay, he's a Mithran god. He's a Mysterion god who intentionally emasculated himself and didn't care. Okay? Now, do you see how the Osirian Mysterion came from that? Because the Osirian Mysterion, Osiris was chopped up by his brother, and all of his pieces were lost, or his one piece was lost, okay? His most important piece for reproduction. So, he's still looking for his piece, and he's never going to find it because he's a mummy, right? He has issues. Because without his piece, he can't, without the part he's missing, see, that's the thing. You got to realize this about why were the Egyptians so big time into having all the parts? Because if you're missing any part, you couldn't be resurrected in the land of the dead, and so therefore Osiris is always dead. Mithras, on the other hand, started alive and chopped off his parts. And we believe that in the Mysterion of Mithras, one of the things they did, like the priesthood, one of the things they did in the priesthood was they made themselves intentionally celibate, as in eunuchs, as part of their last initiation. You know, it's kind of like going into the Shriners, or not Shriners, who's those guys? The Masons, right? And the last thing is, okay, we're not going to tell you a secret, you get to do something else. You know, surprise, surprise, surprise. But the Mithras kind of view, remember this is where we get all that light and dark stuff in the New Testament, from that Mysterion. It really appealed a lot. Now, the idea of Mithras appealed because Mithras is a late date kind of religious kind of view. But the reason Mithras appealed, well, why do you think it appealed to, for example, soldiers? What's the appeal of this kind of God for soldiers? What do you think he promised at the end? The promise of Mithras was salvation, right, of some kind. So the promise of salvation was huge in the Mithran cycle. And what happened to soldiers a lot of times? They crowed, right? And so if you weren't a priest of this group, you didn't have to go through the final initiation. So probably most soldiers were like, well, this is okay with me. I'm happy with that. but they had a lot of light and dark kind of stuff. You know, the Mithrin cycles, remember the early church picked it up because when is Mithras' birthday?
Christmas.
25 December. Okay? So the church borrowed a lot of the Mithrin views and infiltrated the Mithrin worship. The really positive thing for them was the mystery of faith is, you know, Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. And we'll tell you right away, and then we'll give you the initiation. That's, you know, what we do for our kids. We'll teach you, right? And then baptize you, and that's cool. Now, I suspect that the early church would be a little bit upset with the Catholic Church because they went back to Mithrin celibacy to a degree. That's not meant as a negative. It's just, you know, it's kind of an observation, isn't it? I don't know. But in any case, the reason this is, kurios is the word applied to Mithros, and a kurios is also goes to the Latin, which means a place of worship. And in the Latin, it began as a place of worship as an underground. And then later on, it was a place of worship after Constantine that was above ground. And the word became in every language church. In German, Kirche, in English, church. In what's the French is
Église.
Église? Well, that goes ecclesia, because ecclesia is the word for church from the Orthodox. But in English, we get the word church from the Latin, kurios, that comes from kurios in Greek, which means Lord.
Kyrie is the Latin word.
Kyrie.
Yeah.
There you go. Kyrie. So, and by the way, we sing a Kyrie, right? Yeah, exactly. So, anyway, I think that's one of the reasons it's a really interesting word, because I think it's kind of funny that we chose that word to be our word. Well, maybe it's not so funny if we taught our children the reason for it, right? Because, okay, I'll tell you this right flat out. We know, I'm not trying to go down rabbit holes, but these are important kind of cultural things, I think. So, if you look at some of these books, and they took them away or put them back in the library, but remember there was that one book, and the book was expressing the fact to our children, teaching our children, that the Christians borrowed, or when the Christians went someplace, they were acclimated by the groups in that area, in that place. But what was the truth, do you think? The groups didn't bring the Christians in.
We brought them
The Christians brought them in by acclimating themselves with, for example, the Yule log, right? The Yule log, by the way, was done by pagan Sacs, Anglo-Saxons, Celts, Gaelic people forever. So what did the church do? They have a Yule log. The Yule log was done for basically probably Ceridwen. Ceridwen is the goddess in Greek or in Gaelic mythology. That is the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And the maiden, the mother, and crone represents the 3 seasons. There really are 3 seasons. You know that? The 3 seasons in Celtic thought are winter, fall, right? It's getting cold. There's no food. The summer is really warmish, right? And the spring is when everything comes alive. So they basically had 3 seasons. Our original ancestors didn't have 4 seasons. We got the 4 seasons from the Romans. You know that? The Romans were the ones who introduced the idea of 4 seasons, not us. I don't know, maybe because it's even. But the 3 goddesses are all of the pagans had 3 goddesses. And the winter goddess was the goddess that you did the Yule log to. And what was the purpose of the Yule log? Do you anybody know? The Yule log, what's that?
Warmth.
Well, warmth, why? What does that represent? We're really euphemistic, sky candle kind of folks, right, in our language. And the languages of these people is super euphemistic. So what does the warmth represent? The coming. In the middle of winter, what do you want to happen?
Spring.
You want spring, yeah. So the Yule log represented spring. And guess what? The other great, we don't know about it. We have turned it into the May Day, right? The maypole thing. You know what the maypole represents? Any idea? What does a maypole look like? With all the colors, especially red and yellows and oranges. Remember, you don't use other. What's that?
Tree.
Not a tree. Not a rainbow. What's that?
Flower?
No. What is, okay, maybe I'll draw a picture. Let's draw a picture. Right? I draw you a picture all the time. Okay? Here, I'll draw you a picture.
The scent of the sacrifice?
The scent of the sacrifice is a flame. Because what they did, what we don't do anymore, but we used to do, anybody heard of the midsummer fires? The midsummer bonfire? The midsummer bonfire was always done, it's actually not midsummer. It's done to the goddess, for the maiden goddess in the Celtic mythology, and the Cerwyn. So they do one that is on the summer solstice, the beginning of summer, and they do one in the middle of winter. This is all to a Celtic goddess.
Does that coincide with the Guy Fawkes celebration that they do in England?
I don't know.
There's a big bonfire event.
What, is that in summer?
Might sound like about the same time period.
We've lost a few of them because some of them just didn't fit within the church's calendar, right? So what they probably did is, remember, I know for a fact there are some of these things that if you look back far enough into the lore of Britain, you'll probably find that some churches and some church groups did these things, right? Even into probably the 1600s. But today we don't because they discarded them. Why discard them? Well, they're not part of the normal cycle of events, right, within the church calendar, and so they get lost in time. The ones that don't get lost in time, well, they kind of do. How many people do a Yule log? I really don't, you know, but we still talk about it, right? We have songs about it and stuff like that, right? So, you know, what's really interesting, and this is what I think is beautiful, if you look back at how Christianity enveloped their enemies. They weren't their enemies. They were their best buddies, right? And it's just, you know, Mithrin kind of concepts, don't they kind of turn you off? Don't you think they kind of turned off people in the ancient world too? Right? Just like the Athenian thing where you bring your kids to a drunken revelry, not really orgy because they didn't really do that. They were kind of separated. But still, you know, wouldn't you rather say, well, the Christians here are giving us, they have some wine and they have some stuff going on, but our children and our wives and servants are protected, right? So where would you want to go? You know what I'm saying? I mean, all the mothers here say, yeah. Maybe the guys go, a little partying now. No, we all want some degree of stability, right? And stability is generally a positive thing within cultures and society. No matter what people talk about, they don't want Weinsteins in Hollywood. You know, that's grotesque to most people. Anyway, here's the other word, and this is an interesting word. P-R-O-D-E-L-O-N. Now, this is actually prodelos. Prodelos. And if you look at here's my thing right here. Look what it says. We know that I got to read down to 4. This means for, or in front of, right? That's the preposition. But delos. It says that delos is of uncertain derivation. The translation is plain before all men. But I'll give you a chance. You want to try and guess where this... I think that where this word came from is kind of obvious. Because especially since, let's see, the word, it's uncertain derivation, but plain before all men. plain before all men is what pro-delos means. Anybody want to, what's a D word that we know? A place. How about Delphi? There isn't one Delphi, there's 6 places like Delphi. Delphi is the main one, but why would Delos be plain, pro-Delos be plain before all men, or obvious? Because in the Delphitic oracle, what did you expect to hear?
Prophecy.
Prophecy and truth, right? Truth. You expected it, and it would. And remember, in the old days, it was supposed to be plain before all men until the Athenians figured that one out. That's just a funny story, anyway. But pro-Delos, I think, comes probably from pro-Delphi, or from a shortening of Delphi. So Delos, uncertain origin. Okay, I just thought that was a kind of a neat word, especially since, you know, within our context, it kind of means the same thing if you kind of interpret it that way. Like I said, the Greeks are kind of concrete, but they're not euphemistic. They're very concrete, even with their euphemisms. We're on 13. And so 13, let me remind you. We are looking at the Logos to Telos. The Logos to Telos in Hebrews. And the Hebrew writer, they see, here's my little picture. Okay, the big deal here is we have here's the creation, and within the creation is the philosophia, and then there is the world. And then the sacrifice of Christ reaches up, this is a meta-epithumia, from man to God, from God to God, Christ to God in this case. And so the big question that they asked, and we've got these 4 groups. The 4 groups, let's see, Romans, you got Greeks, you got Romans, Greeks, Jews, Hebrews. They're from the diaspora. You've got the Egyptians. To the Hebrews, what this is a logical argument. Now the Greeks and the Hebrews, I've argued before, are really fundamentally, especially in Alexandria, that's why I think this is probably from Alexandria, because they're fundamentally focused in the Hebrew documents, especially the Hebrew documents of the Septuagint, right? LXX. Where was LXX translated from Hebrew to Greek? In Alexandria. Yeah, about 475, 300 is good, or 275 about BC. So LXX, and but it's in Alexandria. And so, what did the Greeks love? History and literature, right? They love it. They love it. So what do you think LXX is to the Greeks, especially in Alexandria? Treasure. It's a bestseller, right? Let me get a hold of that stuff. I mean, like, how many books did they have to read in that era, right? And if somebody's chunking out these books, guess what? I mean, this is like better than sales, because you can sell these things. Remember, a book costs about the same as a 40-acre farm. So people are making money on this. This is a big deal. And Alexandria is the seat of knowledge, pretty much, in the Greek and the Roman Empire. The Romans, boy, they really want to know that Greek, right? So they're taking classes after work. Every one of them, probably, right? About that Greek, and I'd like to learn it. How much do they understand? Their worldviews are different. The worldviews between the Romans and Greeks is different enough that it probably caused them extreme consternation. You should realize this about the Romans. The Romans in their literature never depict it, but you know what? They really had an identity crisis with the Greeks. They're always into doxa, remember, glory. The Greeks are into peace, but peace to them means getting together for a party, basically. A symposia, right? We all may disagree, but we get together in a symposia and we have some people talk, right? And, you know, you listen to what I think and I listen to what you think, and we have a great time and we drink a lot of booze. I mean, this is the way they did their life, right? The Romans,
They were doers, talkers, and
they
the Greeks
were,
were talkers, and the Romans were doers.
yeah, the Romans, so they go out and fight a battle, and they come home and have a party, and no one goes home because they're all drunk. And they never talk because, I mean, they're just drinking all the time. I'm being facetious, but really, the different culture, they have different kinds of cultures and the way they think. You would never have a Roman symposium, not the way the Greeks would, right? The Greeks would think I'm going there to talk, to speak. The Romans would go there because, hey, good drinks, good food, right? That's it.
Sober up and build an
Going to
aqueduct.
the Colosseum or something.
Yeah. What's that?
They prefer going to the Colosseum or something, right? To watch the gladiators or what chariot races or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they would rather be watching NFL football, right? Yeah. I mean, really, that's correct. That is a very good view. And you know what's funny too? The Romans and their language is very euphemistic. The Greeks and their language is very concrete. Totally different ways of looking at the world. In any case, the way we're looking, or our Hebrew scholars are looking at the world, is they're going from a Jewish standpoint, and I believe, now, I probably get a lot of pushback from the university professors. They'd say, oh, you can't imagine that, but I think it's really provable within the context of history. The Greeks are really interested in Septuagint. The Romans would like to, right? The Hebrews are big time into it. And how do you think the Egyptians feel? There's this natural thing between the Egyptians and the Hebrews. Do you know that? They both circumcised. They both come from similar sources. They have historical tales that, you know, the Egyptians reading the Septuagint in the Torah about the Hebrews. There's some negative, right? But you know what? There's some positive too. Anyone know where Tutankhamun was considered on the Egyptian list of good guys, bad guys? Tutankhamun was Tutankhamun was the god and the pharaoh during the time of the Egyptian, during the time the Israelis, during the time Moses left, right? But the big deal was he changed their godhead to a single god. Now, whether that happened after, in my book, I write in Egypt that I consider it happened after the children of Israel left, or before. After about 2 generations, they went back from having a single god, Tutankhamun, to having multiple gods again. So, whatever happened in the Egyptian society, Tutankhamun isn't considered a very happy dude. And so, the Egyptians would probably look at the Torah and the Septuagint in a more positive light than we might think. But the big deal in this is the idea of well, I don't want to use sanctification. Forgiveness of sins, redemption, right? Because the whole deal of all these groups, from Mithrans to everyone, what do they want?
They want hope. They want assurance of something in the afterlife. They want salvation.
Exactly. Especially since, you know, life for the Egyptians and the Jewish people, and if you're rich, maybe it's really happy, right? You're going, whatever. But for the average person, life is pretty rough. These are all starvation, all these are starvation cultures. So for all these people, it's a rough life. They want assurance of the afterlife. They want assurance of salvation. They want goodness. And what Hebrews is giving us is, remember in Romans, the question of Romans is, the question the Romans wanted to know, does this God guy, Jesus Christ, apply to us? The Hebrews are asking the same question, but I think they're asking a more generic question, even a greater generic question. They're not asking just for the Romans. They're asking for the Greeks, the Jews, and the Egyptians all together, because they're Alexandrians, and they're doing an intellectual argument. Yes, sir?
What in Egypt, what happened to the people when the Pharaoh died? You know, the Pharaoh took all his possessions with him for the afterlife. But what about the common person? What was the belief that happened to them at death?
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's why, okay, we saved for our retirement. The Egyptians didn't. The Egyptians saved for their death. So they saved up their money, and they were able to do that. They were one of the reasons the Egyptians never became a great trading nation was because all their money didn't go to trade, it went internally. And they became a great, people traded with them like crazy. From the Phoenicians to the Greeks to the Romans, they were a huge trade accepting nation with lots of money because they had lots of grain and other things to provide, linen, grains, all kinds of really cool stuff, not so much metals. But they would take that because they wanted hard currency. The reason the Egyptians wanted hard currency is because even up into the later periods of until Christianity really became strong in the Egyptian culture, they saved their money for their death because they want to be mummified. Now, even if it was a cheap mummification, right? You had the really high-cost Pharaoh kind of stuff where they ripped your brains out, to the really low-cost thing where they just kind of chopped your head off and then, or whatever. You didn't get the full treatment, right? Maybe got dipped in lye for a couple of days and then wrapped up. But they saved everything for their future was afterlife, right? And it was a huge and important thing to them. So, what's that?
No, they're mercantilist.
Yeah, except they were really an internal culture. The Egyptians were an internal culture. Although a lot of stuff got shipped off from Egypt in ideas. We know that because the Greeks, anyway, Hippolytus tells us a lot about that in his travels. I think it's Hippolytus. Anyway, go look back. Anyway, I say this because, we're going, we're making about 2 verses at a time, so we're at the 13. Here's what it says. This is 7:13. And I gave you it. You've got the translation right here, but let's look into it. We kind of got into a little bit of this, so I'm going to go quickly over 13. He of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe has ever served at the altar. Who's the he? Jesus. And also could be Melchizedek. He of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe has ever served at the altar. So, here it is in the Greek. Gar, assigning a reason, he is added, over whom these things, literally tauta, these things, are lego, our logical argument. Metacho, share or participate to another, a heritos, an other or different phule, offshoot, a sect, literally a sect, of which, literally hos, whom, of whom, odos, not even one, prosecco, literally gave attendance, was to hold in the mind or sacrificed at the Thusaterion, the place of sacrifice. So, here's a translation for this. Assigning a reason over whom these things lay forth a logical argument, participates a different sect or offshoot, of whom not even one had in mind to lift a sacrifice at the place of sacrifice. This is literal Greek. So in other words, okay, the way it looks like it's written, or the way it's translated, he of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe has ever served at the altar. But the Greek doesn't say that at all. In other words, what the Greek says is the people that were of that tribe. Which tribe? Judah would what? It's not that they weren't allowed. They would never think of doing it. Now, why this is important? This is very important. Because what did Maccabee do? In Maccabee, the tribe of Levi that Maccabee was from, that Maccabeus was from, what did he do? He didn't take the priest, he did take the priesthood illegally, but he was from the tribe of Levi. So from that tribe, right, so that would kind of be that wouldn't be an okay, but it would be at least it's the right tribe, right? But what did he do? What did he and his sons claim?
To be the Messiah.
To be the king also.
To be the king.
And so wrong tribe for that.
Wrong tribe. Remember? And what the point is here is no one from the tribe of Judah should have ever thought to be a priest, right? But no one from the tribe of Levi should have ever thought to be the king, right? See, this is very important. The translation it gives us, okay, I'll go with the translation. But the point is, it's just like that other one, the one previous where we had, the one last week, where is that? Where I told you, that the people legislated who was going to be a priest by law. And that we know is not, originally in the Torah, who legislated who should be a priest? God did, not the people. But I told you, when they came back from the diaspora, the people, legislated who should be the priest and also who should be the king, right? What did the people do with the Maccabees? They legislated who would be their king. In other words, they're not following the law of God, right? I think this is really important. The next one, we go to 13, we go to 14. 14, this is what it says. For it is clear that our Lord descended from Judah, and in regard to that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. That's not exactly what it says. Let's read it in the Greek. Gar, assigning a reason. Isn't it funny that we get this for, but assigning a reason is a logical formulation in Greek. So it's kind of interesting that we want to translate it as for. Okay. Assigning a reason, the it is added pro delos. Pro delos, that's this word right here. Pro delos, pro delon. Plain before all men, which some, it's not that, it's which some, our, literally, himon, of us, Lord, kurios. It's kurios. They capitalize it in the English, but it's not capitalized. It's either uncles or the whatever in the Greek. So, kurios, spraying, antatello, to cause to rise. Remember Anatello or Anastasius Nekros, right? To stand up in the marketplace from death. He sprang up, Anatello, caused to rise out of, or sprang up from, it's not out of, it's literally from, ek, Judah. Ice to which tribe, hos fule, offspring or sect, same word is used in the 13. Moses lay low. Moses lay low. He uttered words, odis, not even one, concerning the priesthood, or through a priest, through the priesthood. Here's my translation. Assigning a reason plain before all men, which some of us Lord to cause to rise from Judah, to which offshoot or sect Moses uttered words, not even one, all over or through about a priest. Okay, what's important about this, I think, within the context of what it says in the Greek. So, he says it's plain to all men that Jesus Christ came from the tribe of Judah. That it's obvious to everyone. He's saying there's no debate. That everyone, whether you're Roman, Greek, Jewish, or Egyptian, you would agree that based on the data that they have, that there's no other place this Jesus guy could come from but the tribe of Judah. But notice what it says. Moses lay low. It doesn't say Moses lego. Do you see the difference here? In other words, Moses never said anything about a priest coming from Judah. He didn't lego it. In other words, if he legoed it, what would that mean?
He was convinced, or?
Yeah, he would be convinced. It would be an absolute argument. If I lego it, that means I am absolutely convinced of the fact. So, in other words, God told me, or based in pure reason and logic, there is, you know, I'm saying it, but the word they use is lelo. And I suspect, I didn't go back and look, all right? But if you look back in the Septuagint, where it talks about Moses doing these things, I bet in the Septuagint you would find that it says that Moses legoed, or Moses layloed, if there is a reference that's directly. I suspect there is not a direct reference. That's neither here nor there. The point is, this is a beautiful Greek large argument setup. Do you see this setup? Okay, let's see what the next one says, because I think it'll become even clearer. In 15, and this is what it says. Here's the translation. And what we have said is even more clear. If another priest like Melchizedek appears. Here's what it says in the Greek. Kai, and. Esti. Esti is one of our words. It is. It is eti, still, parasoterion, in a more superabundant way. It is far more, in a more superabundant way, evident. Katadelos. Oh, I like this. We get the word katadelos. Katadelos. Kata means down, delos. And katadelos is translated as manifest or down clear, as opposed to, well, it's interesting, right? If delos is self-evident as truth, right? Down delos or Delphi is even more evident as truth. I like the way, what's that?
Inarguable.
Inarguable, yes, yes. For that, if after, literally not after, but down the similitude, homoetois, similarity of Melchizedek, their anastemi ek nekros, remember that? If anastemi, another, a hertros, other different priest. Okay, you know, I told you, the Greeks are concrete. Look at what this guy did, these writers did. They're throwing in terms that directly, this is like Mark. Remember in Mark, every other verse in Mark, he would tell you about teen horos, the way. Every other thing would be the way, the way, the way. He would never let you forget about the way. This guy has just pitched in twice in two different, sentences, a remembrance to you. Anastemi ek nekros and egerio ek nekros are the two ways that in Greek, there's no word, Merrick, at this time in the world, there is no word in any language that means to resurrect from the dead, to resurrect. No word. The Greeks say it by saying anastemi ek nekros or egerio ek nekros. That's the way that they express it. It depends on which New Testament word. The reason you have different why do you think you have different expressions by different authors?
Because there isn't one word.
There isn't a word. They use what they thought was best.
They use the word they thought was best, which even, and what I'm trying to point out here, because I get so irritated. You guys have heard of Q, right? Because I've told you about Q, but you've heard of Q before. What's Q? Anybody know what Q is?
Thought that all the Gospels do, right?
The document that the other the Gospels came from.
Yeah,
They're all copies.
The master document.
the master document that from Q came Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is considered a separate source, but Q is supposed to be a sayings gospel. They believe it's probably a sayings gospel that all the others, that later on somebody had to. No one's ever found Q. If Mark uses egerio ek nekros and Luke uses anastemi ek nekros, what does that automatically tell you?
They're not looking at the same source text.
There can't be a Q, right? So I'm just throwing this out. Now, we haven't studied Luke in that detail, but if you remember in Matthew and Luke, Matthew kind of threw in a couple of stemis and a couple of egerios, right? Where Mark was almost always egerio ek nekros. Right? And here, the author throws in a couple of, well, he used anastemi ek nekros almost from the beginning. See? Means they're separate documents. Means they're separate authors. Means it's not a single same source like this Q thing. In any case. Okay. Here's the translation. And it is still in a more superabundant way manifest, down clear, if down this similarity of Melchizedek stands up a different priest. Okay. What tribe was Melchizedek? What? You tell me he's not from any tribe?
Predated tribes, yes. He predated Israel.
Yeah, and even more so. Remember I told you about Melchizedek? Melchizedek was a Alpha Omega kind of dude. He has no beginning and no end. That was the setup, right? That was the setup by the author of Hebrews. In other words, he has no new genealogy, right? Now, Jesus Christ, he has a genealogy. But what does it mean if you're an Alpha and Omega in the Greek worldview?
You're God.
You're God. And already, okay, it's already been proven into the Hebrew writer's proof text that who is God? Jesus is God. Right? That's what he starts out with. Right at the beginning, we get this argument, a logos to tell us that this Jesus guy is God. That's it. That's the flat out. So you're supposed to remember that. I mean, okay, they probably get it all in one setting. We can't do that because our Greek isn't good enough. But, and our culture isn't good enough. I wish I could transport us all back. We'd all probably die the first day. But if we could transport everybody back into Greek culture, right, and we could see it and live it and know it and feel it, we would hear it being read to us in the synagogue or in their kirko or ecclesia, right? We hear it and we know it and we get it. We would be sitting there listening to this logical argument and it would flow to us and we would see it. Let's go on. Okay, let me see. Is there anything else we need in here that's really important? Just look at the Anastaviac necklace. So, and I just think it's funny. I told you it'd become more clear, and it says, and what we have said is more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears. Well, guess what? That's a translation, but even in the Greek, it's still in a more superabundant way manifest. If down the similarity of Melchizedek stands up. Now, I do want to mention this. Stands up a different priest. I made a big deal about anastemic necros, but what is the other anastemi? What is the other stand up? Where Jesus indicated that he was.
Oh, at the feast,
Yeah.
festival,
When the
so
priest said
when the Messiah was supposed to announce himself.
Yeah, and you know what? I would love to take claim to that, but I can't because that comes from Edersheim. Edersheim writes in it because he studied the Hebrew culture. So if you read Edersheim, he got it out of Josephus, and I read Josephus, but he pulled it out of the Hebrew literature before. But we know from Josephus, and then Edersheim writes about it, that at the Festival of Booths, and I'll repeat it because I think it's so cool. It's so cool. Remember when they're bringing up the water from the pool of Shiloah, and the high priest says the 118th Psalm. Do you know in other Orthodox, or liturgical type Orthodox churches, when they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, they cross themselves because the first words before, blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh, and the high priest, we don't know if he whispered it, but he says those words at the end of the 118th Psalm. And when he said that in John, and I believe also in Luke, I can't remember. Anyway, when he said that, Jesus Christ stood up and he said, I will give you living water. And the reason that was so important is because the pool of Shiloah had not been giving living water for a long time. And that's where they got the water. So when Jesus said, I will give you living water, boy, he not only did he indicate he was the Messiah, he indicated he would cleanse the altar. He indicated, euphemistically, he would be the sacrifice. And I think that our writers here in Hebrews also are indicating the anastemi. He stood up and indicated that he was Messiah. He also stood up in the temple. Did the king stand up in the temple? Who stands up in the temple? The high priest stands up in the temple, right? And he eventually enters into the holy place, the Holy of Holies. Let's see. So 16. Here's the translation. Here's the NIV. One who has become a priest not on the basis of a regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of an indestructible life. All right, now let's see what the Greek says, because this is obviously packed. Can you tell the packingness of this Greek? Okay, who? Hos. Hos, gnome, is caused to be. Is caused to be, never down nomos. Never down, V is added. Never down nomos. Of a sarkinos. Sarkinos. Sarx. Sarx. Sarkinos. Of a flesh. Of a fleshly, similar to flesh, in tola. In tola.
Telos.
Yeah, telos. In tola. Telos. In telos. Because a telos, right, is something that can be on a moving scale, but an in telos is a fixed telos. A fixed telos. We usually translate this to be a commandment, but it's really not a commandment. Okay, logic thinkers, logicians. What is an intola? What are the three things? When we make a logical argument, we start with one. There's two. There's assumptions, and there are definitions. Yes, definitions, and definitions are basically facts, right? A definition is a fact. An assumption is something that you assume from a fact, and then you make your three logical argument, and then you have four conclusions. A telos is like a conclusion, and in telos is more like a definition or fact. You see, we translate it commandment. I don't like the word commandment as well. You know, see, when we say commandment to our children, like we say the 10 Commandments, we act as if the 10 Commandments are what? When you say the 10 Commandments, it's like they're optional, right? As opposed to, like, if I say the law of gravity.
You're refuted.
Yeah, the law of gravity, if you break the law of gravity, what happens? You're dead. You'll die. It's not a good thing. But, you know, in our worldview, a commandment in telos to the Greek, like gravity, is a definition. You know, or even if you want to say an assumption, I assume there's gravity, right? And if I drop off a building with 4 stories, I'll probably break my legs. A commandment is an telos. A commandment's the same kind of thing, right? So, is it an option? Well, in the view of the Hebrews, no, it's not an option. Matter of fact, the Hebrews said, this is what the Hebrews said, I love what they say. In the Talmud, they say, if God himself came down and said, you know, the 10 Commandment, you know, the first commandment or the second commandment, I decided I'm changing things. I'm getting rid of them. I'm going to throw them out. What would the Jewish rabbis say? I think that's a good conclusion. They would say, well, God can't do that. Because why?
He can't contradict himself.
Well, not only that, they're in Tola. In other words, when God created the world, he didn't create the world and then invent the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are, in the Greek and in the Jewish worldview, the 10 Commandments are what are, yeah, they're integrated in the fabric of the universe.
Like the moral law that we all know instinctively. It's just part of
Natural law.
Yeah.
Ooh, yes. Okay, now you just hit a true that is an absolute true theological concept right there, but I'll go with it. Natural law, natural theology is what it's called, natural theology. That's what the early Catholic Church believed, and that's what guess who believed? Martin Luther, our buddy, right? Martin Luther was purely a natural law theology. And by the way, the Constitution of the United States is based in
Natural
Yes.
law.
natural law.
Laws of nature, nature's God, Declaration of Independence.
Bingo, exactly. Every person should have this ingrained within their being, right? Because they are ingrained within the being of the universe. That is the belief of natural law. And I think it's a great theology. We should be teaching it as theology. Unfortunately, we've gone away from it, but whatever.
Is it any wonder then that when our society has tossed out we are now moved on to tossing out other objective scientific facts, like men are men and women are women, like, you know, it all goes together.
I agree. You know, exactly. And do you want to give weapons to people who can't tell that they're a boy or a girl? I would have a problem with that, okay? Just saying. But, you know, I'm kind of, you know, okay, what's with this problem? But yeah, exactly. So, as a matter of fact, I'll go even further. You remember in Romans? We studied Romans in the first and second chapter of Romans. It's a logical argument, and it says exactly this. They don't use the terms natural law. It wasn't natural theology. Natural law had not been theoretized the way that we have today. But if you look at it, that's exactly what Romans says. It says that every person is ingrained or has the view of the correct view of the creation in them, and that what happens is when you begin to reject it, you go into perversity. You know, it's not just sin anymore. You go into absolute perversities. And we see that, by the way, in history. One of the reasons that the Greeks, and maybe it'll come to our society, it could, but one of the reasons the Greeks, I believe, accepted Christianity in the first century was because they were looking at such perversity. And the Romans, remember I told you the Romans really loved the Greek stuff? The Romans were into doxa. How much doxa can you have with perversion? You can't have glory. You know, you can't be a Weinstein guy like ugly and stupid and mean and cruel and expecting sexual favors. On the other hand, you can't be a woman who is trying to buy her way into Hollywood with sexual favors, right? I mean, either one is perverse. And you look at it and you go, this is a basis for your society and culture and morals? No, this is horrific. And by the way, if you look at some of the Greek, before the dissolution really of the Greek classicism, a beautiful book, I can't remember who wrote it, but the Wine Dark Sea, I think it's called The Wine Dark Sea. Really neat Greek thing, but it talks about the dissolution of Greek culture. And one of the things you see is perversion in their art. Remember that really cool, there's a really cool piece of sculpture that shows a Cupid like basically pursuing a nymph. The nymph has male and female characteristics. They basically have a transgendered sculpture that isn't based on reality because the Greeks didn't allow that in their culture. But yet that was an epic of their art near the depth of their culture. Yes, sir?
Well, Romans had a certain honor, was kind of almost their natural law, and that probably kept them more on the right track of not going down where the Greeks went.
Not really.
At
because
time-
the
at
Romans were
times.
very riddled with
Probably
perversions. I mean,
yeah.
really bad. And
One
they
of the
went
Caesars
downhill
had
too.
a
Yeah.
male lover that fell off of a ship in the Nile and was drowned, and he had him included in the pantheon of Roman gods.
The Caesars were completely
Yeah.
just perverse. And
But I'm just saying that they did have honor among the soldiers and so forth.
Well,
that maybe
yeah,
perverted, but it led them maybe to accepting more of the.
And I think a lot of it depends on when in the Roman Empire you're
Yeah.
talking about. There was a cycle probably at the Roman Republic as it became an empire where there was a
Probably led to the fall.
Well, let me put it together. Let me put it together so you guys, like, I know where you're going, and you're right on. Every statement here is, I think, right on. The thing is, though, what you need to realize, yes, the Romans were big time into honor. Their leadership, however, had become perverse. Whether you want to believe it was because they were drinking too much lead in their cola, they had lead in their wine, that may have really affected them mentally because they really had a lot of unstable nutheads, but it could have been inbreeding too, because they had some real issues with inbreeding. That's what always happens in these cultures, dynastic cultures, where it's based in heredity, where they only marry certain groups and people. You always have this. So whether they did it that way, but what you said is precisely correct, because they had a great feeling of honor, and the legions held that to a high epic. So guess what? When the legions saw the emperor acting like an idiot, what was their choices? They had two choices, really. You can rebel physically, and what happens? You rebel physically and you are, that's it, right?
Depends if you win.
Yeah, if you're gonna shoot at the king, you have to kill him.
And what you saw is you saw some rebellion. Some of the Romans did it, but they got squished. So what is your other option for rebellion?
To get into the system.
Yep. We know that the legions were big time into Mithran worship, and they were being forced into imperial worship, worship of the emperor. But if your emperor is a sot and an idiot, you don't do that. So guess where you go?
Look for something else.
You go to, guess what Rai Cho gave you? Guess what Christ gave you? Christ said, guess what? I have a mysterion. Here it is. Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. Christ did it all. No need for sacrifice. Every time you sacrifice, it's what? Thanksgiving! Right? It's Thanksgiving. It's communion. You don't have to do it because you're sinning. You don't have to do it because of this. You can, and guess what? You can do your job, even if your job is a little bit upsetting, maybe morally questionable, right? Depending on who, what, where, and when. But guess what you can do? Because you're looking to something else, and also, we saw that dumb movie, the Force Awakens thing, right? We were watching that last night. And you have the Stormtrooper clone who beat his...
Don't spoil it!
Don't
spoil it!
Don't
spoil it!
This is the one before.
okay.
Yeah, so Force Awakens, not the last Jedi.
Okay, that one.
Haven't everybody seen the Force Awakens? Anyway,
Okay, that one you can.
well, you have the clone warrior in that movie who comes back from the dark side, right? Guess what you had? Remember 40 brave soldiers? You had people, you had these soldiers, the legions, and a whole legion could be worshiping Christ. And guess what? It isn't that they would not do their duty, right? Their duty was to the Roman Republic. They just wouldn't do what? Well, they wouldn't do the dirty work of the emperor, right? When you're posted in Gaul, when you're posted in Gaul and you get a letter that says wipe out this village, and guess what? Half the village, you're married to half the village, right? What do you do?
Write them back. Write them back. It's done. We got them.
It's done. We did it, right? And if one of your officers,
It was the worst place you could go anyway.
They cross.
What worse could happen to you?
Exactly, precisely. Well, I just think you got a second lieutenant. You got your second lieutenant, right? Who just came, and he goes, "Well, I'm not married yet. I'm not going to do that." He disappears, right? Just saying. Anyway, we'll start there next week. Thank you, folks. Oh no, next week. The Jesus birthday party next week. So the week after that. All right, Father God, thank you for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.
And what's worse is you cross the Rhine, burn the bridges, and then get slaughtered by